All right, so this video, I'm going to be going over a bunch of different shortcuts and hotkeys that I'm utilizing when working inside of Blender. There's a comment that I see quite regularly on my videos where guys are asking for screencast keys. And the problem with screencast keys is it actually messes up autosave, but also it doesn't display everything, even in vanilla Blender. And on top of that, I use custom shortcuts and hotkeys quite regularly, so it would actually display the wrong things. And the only reason I change things around is because it makes life a little bit easier to change things around just a tiny bit anyways, so I can work a little bit faster. And so, this video is really for those guys. And if you're new to Blender, you'll learn maybe a little bit here. And even if you've been using it for a little while, that should help you out quite a bit as well. So we're going to do this in vanilla Blender, and we're just going to get started with like the viewport. Most of you would know that if you middle mouse click, you can orbit, shift middle, you can pan, right? And then control middle mouse click, you can zoom in and out, or mouse wheel. And so that's great. But if you're working on an object, if you alt middle mouse click, you can actually focus on what's underneath the mouse, which is quite useful. So you can always get around this way as well. The tilde key, for example, will let you view from the left, the right, top, and the bottom, or you can view a selected object as well. So if you have multiple objects, just for a quick example, you can tilde key, view selected. If you get lost in the viewport, you don't know where you are, you select something off an outliner, tilde key, view selected, boom, you're right there. So now you can alt middle mouse click all you want. All right, very simple. While orbiting, you can hold down Alt and it will jump into the side views here. When you middle mouse click and start orbiting and you hold Alt, middle mouse click and gesture, it will jump into the different views as well. Left, top, bottom, right, and all that fun stuff, right? So very useful. Sometimes you want to work in orthographic view instead of perspective. Number pad 5 turns that on and off. And over here, you can also do the same thing. So if you ever see it turn to orthographic and it looks kind of funny, you can just number pad 5 it. Right? Selecting multiple objects, holding shift, very simple and easy to do. The last object you select here, the highlighted one, is going to be what's known as the active element. It's the last one you select, generally speaking. But that's just what you're going to do to possibly use this as like a pivot point, right? So we can rotate from that object if needed. This is also very useful when you end up snapping to things like the grid or maybe doing vertex snapping. But they do have an active element over here as well for snapping. So you got to be aware of that. Sometimes you need to use this one. Sometimes you need to use this one. It just depends. All right. Okay. So now that we got that out of the way, X is a quick way of deleting things. You just tap X. You can do that, right? We can get rid of some of these real quick. And when you're going in and out of edit mode, usually it's the tab key, right? However, control tab is a pie menu. I actually prefer using this even if I'm in vanilla Blender. In preferences, when you bring up preferences, you can go to actually key map. You can turn on tab for pie menus, so you don't have to hit control tab anymore. You just hit tab, and that'll always bring up a pie menu. It's quite useful. All right. Now, I also flick wireframes on and off quite regularly. That's this little guy here. If you right click this, you can assign it to a shortcut. Usually I assign it to my mouse. So it's just going to be an on off on the mouse, generally speaking. But you can do that with pretty much anything. You got to do the checkbox in this case. But most things you can actually assign to a shortcut, which is quite nice, right? So whenever you have something you're not real sure about, you can come up here and let's say you're using modifiers or something else. Usually you can right click on things. And if you don't see it, that's possible. They don't have everything updated necessarily. But a lot of times they will have, for example, an online manual option. And if that exists, you can go look at the online manual and pull it up. And Blender's manual is very useful for understanding more about the tools that you're using, okay? The menus are context sensitive. So one of the things that a lot of guys might maybe not understand first is that like if I'm in object mode, this right-click menu is kind of context sensitive. So if I go into edit mode, it's going to switch to, in our case, vertex. In edit mode, when you're selecting a vertex, edge, or face, 1, 2, and 3, that changes each time. So now it says face. If I do that, you can see it's now edge. And if I do that, it's now vertex. You can actually enable all these by holding shift. You'll get the whole menu set up like this if you wanted to. It's not very useful to sometimes do, well, usually it's not useful to do that, but it is possible. So if you ever want to do that, there it is. All right, so let's talk a little bit about selections real quick, and we'll jump back into object mode for this. Let me create a plane. So to create objects, this is the add menu, right? It's just Shift A. Okay, that's all you have to press. You can bring up Shift A. Now you can create everything you need right here. And so I just want to create a plane real quick in object mode. And if we do that, let's just go ahead I'm just going to subdivide it real quick by right-clicking in edit mode. So I'm usually hopping in and out of object mode and edit mode very fast. But I got face selection, right-click, subdivide it. I can set right here, bring this panel open, do a number of cuts, and cut it up quite a bit. I want to just talk about selections for a little bit real quick. So generally speaking, selections kind of work differently based off of what you're using. So if you're using a vertex, edge, or face, it's going to just behave slightly different. So if I select edges, for example, if I hold shift, I can select multiple edges. And if I hold shift and select one I already had selected, it deselects it. Pretty simple. A selects everything. Double tapping A deselects everything. Very easy to do. We have something called shortest path selection where you hold control and it will try to figure out the shortest path. So from like here to here, boom, it's going to do that. You can actually adjust how it behaves a little bit if you need to, but generally it works best if you just kind of click when you know it's going to work, like the shortest direction to where you're trying to go. You can kind of click around and make it work out just the way you want. So you can go ahead and make selections in this manner. Now, alt clicking usually selects a loop, but there's a little bit of a problem with this when you have n-gons, okay? So, or actually it's not even about the n-gons necessarily. A lot of times it has more to do with, like, let's say I dissolve some of this real quick. Still used to using add-ons, pie menu. Anyways, Control X this, we can dissolve selected. So Control X is really quite useful. But if we do like an alt click here now with edges, so alt click, you see how it dead ends? And the reason it's dead ending is because it's an end pull right here. So it doesn't really know which direction to go when you make that selection. Whereas if you were to alt click here, you'll see it behaves as you expect. Let's try a different mesh real quick. Let me just make something in a cubic shape real quick. And we'll get this going. So extrusion is E, but we'll get back up to all these in a second. If we do something like this and it's subdivided, not sharpened, you'll see here, edge selection, alt clicking, we'll get a loop. Alt shift clicking, we'll get multiples. We can alt shift click here, deselect. We can hold shift, deselect. We can do a click, shift click, control click, do shortest path. So we can do these kinds of fun things while working. And it's just a combo of like shift, control, and alt for a lot of things in Blender. And sometimes it takes a little while to get used to working with them, but it is possible to get in here and do this. So if you want to select like this, you can hold, hit Control B, you can do a bevel. In our case, it's going to be a chamfer with one segment, but you can definitely crank that up if you wanted to. Some fun things start to occur when you start working with your geo. There's a lot of other selection methods. So one of them is going to be select more or less right here. So if I want to grow this selection, I can do more with Control number pad plus or minus. Generally, I'm also putting this onto my mouse, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. And I'm assigning it to my own, or basically I'm setting my mouse up with a macro so that I can use Control number pad plus. And it also works with other things like bool tools or box cutter and hard ops potentially, and machine tools as well. So here's the thing is that we select more, it selects more, right? Control Z, you can go back, select less, you can select less. You can see it actually selects that inner edge there when we do that. So that's kind of a trick, neat little trick there that you can potentially utilize. You can also do other things like select loops, boundary loop, and that'll let us select the borders of it. Okay, so that might be something else you might be interested in. It's quite useful, and this is something you might want on a shortcut or a hotkey as well. If you had a selection, well, let's do select less real quick. We'll select loops and or excuse me, select less, so select more or less. And I'm going to Alt S, which is shrink or flatten, I think it is what they call it, right? Yeah, shrink, flatten. Basically, it's moving along normals, so Alt S just brings it in like this. It also has options here for like offset even. You see we can do that. And that can be quite useful in some cases. In this case, maybe not as much. But like, maybe I want to do a bevel on all those edges still, right? So we could do a bevel right now here in the middle, perhaps, so Control B. But we could do select more. And now we could do something like select loops, boundary loops. Now we can bevel all these as well. Okay. So if we ever have to do bevels across, larger sections like this, this is one of the ways you might end up wanting to work with it. And because it's all quads, it should subdivide fairly well. Okay. Now, of course, we don't have really great holding edges here in these areas, so the subdivision is not going to work out that great. But subdivision is just a modifier. When in object mode, you hit Control 1 through 5, it will add a subdivision modifier. You'll see it's changing the levels here for the viewport, but not the render Okay, this is kind of important to understand. Now, if we were in sculpt mode and we hit Control 1 through 5, it's going to add a multi-res modifier. Okay. If we go back to object mode and we hit Control 1 through 5, it's going to update the levels in the viewport. Okay, so the sculpt has its own levels, the viewport has its own levels, and the render. The multi-res is pretty neat in that aspect, but it's basically a subdivision modifier, more or less, that you can sculpt on, and that's for a different video, but you can see how that plays out now, right? Let's go over something I kind of skipped here. Let's do Shift-A, create a plane. I'm just going to press S and scale it, and I'm going to bring it down, something like so. I'm going to turn this grid off real quick. And so a lot of times when you're working on something, you want to have an idea of like the scale or the proportions of things. So if I shift right click, I can move this 3D cursor and place it where I want. Press Shift A, create a mesh, and we can do a cube. This cube, right? Select that bottom face. We're going to press G and Z and hold Control, snap it up. G and Z, hold Control, snap it up. All right. If we want to do that, we could. Press N, bring out the side panel. It actually has dimensions here. So a lot of times for human size reference, it's going to be something like 1 by 1 meter by 1.8. And this is approximately the size that a human would fit in a box, basically, right? So the size of a character, if you would. So this little reference box here, this is the scale that we're actually working at, right? And if I was to press Shift tilde key, we can now use WASD to fly around. Mouse wheel up and down to speed up and down. We can fly around. Very good to navigate this way. It's very easy to do. And so, but you can Shift tilde key and hit G to turn on gravity if you wanted to. And now you can kind of run around as if it was something like a first-person game, right? And so you can get a better understanding of your spaces and your dimensions if you're working inside of Blender. And that's going to be quite useful when setting up scenes and working on objects that are bigger and stuff. So you can tell what's going on anyways. So do turn Shift tilde key on, which is technically fly mode, and we hit G, it's like walk mode, basically. So there's actually a fly mode for Shift tilde key as well, but that's a different video. It's actually called fly mode, and this one is actually called walk mode. And when you hit G, it just lets you actually turn the gravity on. But anyway, so with that out of the way, there are other selection methods. We go back to edit mode. We can use things like C to use the cursor selector, mouse wheel up and down to make it bigger or smaller. We can left click to select things, and we can middle mouse click to deselect things, and we can right click to get out of that. Okay, so whatever you have will be selected at that point. If you have a selection, you can hit Control I. You can invert selections as well. Quite useful to know. That's going to be one that you might not really understand if I do it and don't mention it. And so definitely want to know that one as well. All right. And so when you're in edit mode and you're working on a mesh, you have things like extrusion. Pay attention. This is extrude and move. So what it's doing is it's creating a face and then it's not doing nothing with it, right? Or it's moving it after, excuse me. But let me rephrase that, make it a little bit more clear. It's extruding and then moving. Okay. So it creates a face and then it turns on the move tool basically. Now, or it's equivalent of like pressing G, but it's constrained to the normal direction. So the normal direction in this case is going out at that angle, right? Between these two faces, but they average together. So when we select two like this, when we press E, you can see, well, usually they average together, but I think I have active on still. So that's actually influencing this. But if it was at median point, that would be what averages it together. So it would actually go out in this direction, right? So this does have a role in how your tools are going to behave. And that's, I think, a great example there of it, because if we grab here, this is active, it's going to go out at that angle. We'll go over the transforms here in just a bit. But the main thing being is that whenever you're using any tools, they usually have options right here. But while you're doing the operation for extrusion, for example, look at the bottom of the screen here. There's all kinds of options for like setting snap base and this and this and that. You can start experimenting with those while you're working with the tools. So for example, if we were doing edge bevels, perhaps, and I hit Control B, this is fine. We can mouse wheel it up and down all day long, but we can hit something like P and we can start setting the profile, for example. Or maybe we want to change the bevel method. So we'll, instead of using offset, which is what it's doing by default, we can hit M a few times and it'll change it to you can see at the top there in the middle, it says it's using offset, width, depth, or percentage. So we can do things like this, right? In order to make a more efficient use of our tools anyways, we can just kind of, use different shortcuts for it or change those options there on the fly by hitting some of those letters or whatever the case, right? In our case, like we're doing a bevel here and we want to change profile. We can also do it after the fact. That's fun. You can right click these. You can reset them. You can see there's online manuals for a lot of this stuff still, which is nice. And so, yeah, there's just a lot to take in when it comes to working with Blender and modeling in general. But once you get used to this idea, like just control clicking, shift clicking, and shift clicking sometimes, it's really quite simple to get in here and start working with these tools. And now that you know these tools have options, this is where I think another thing that'll kind of mess some guys up watching my videos at least is a lot of times I'm using the knife tool, right? And the knife tool is rather kind of tricky because if we use it in edit mode here, we press K. There's nothing wrong with using it in this manner where you're kind of free cutting, perfectly fine. But you can also do things like pressing K or excuse me, press K, use the knife tool and hit like X, Y, or Z. You can always do that as well to cut edges in this manner, perhaps. One that I often use is angle cuts. So if I press K, start a cut, and I hit A, it's actually a little tricky here. Press A, that's going to be angle snapping, but this is based off of like the view or something like that. If I press A again, that's relative angle. Okay, you see the edge there turn red. So this is what's going to allow you to actually see the degrees here of what you're cutting off of another edge, perhaps. If you press S, it's going to show you this setup here where you got the degrees and the length of what you're doing, right? So that could be quite useful, but you can also just press S again, just show the length, or S again and just show the degrees. This is what I'm doing in a lot of my videos. Now, Blender by default, which I think is a terrible setting, is to have it snap every 30 degrees, basically, right? And so what you want to do is you want to tap the number you want to use. In our case, maybe 5, right? Usually works out pretty well. So if we tap 5, we now get 5-degree increments. This is a real pain to kind of do every time you're doing a knife cut, especially if you're doing lots of knife cuts. So I don't actually recommend necessarily working with it in that manner. This is why if you go into key map here, a lot of your Blender operations you can customize here. And so you go to key map, you type in like knife tool, and that's, whoop, try to type that in right. And you can see the K key, knife topology tool when we're in mesh or edit mesh mode. And you can see we can change things here so that we always see maybe like the angle, or we change this to like 5, for example. Okay, so it's always going to be 5 now. It'll always have that angle display and we'll be good to go. Let's change one other thing. I'll show you how this one works as well. So we're going to do the 3D cursor. So a lot of times, like the 3D cursor option here actually has option to do like surface project, and you can make it snap, have different orientations when it snaps to the surfaces and whatnot. Unfortunately, when you shift right click, it doesn't do that exactly. So type in 3D cursor. You'll see the shift right mouse button here in the 3D view. You can change this to have it align to geometry, which is really useful sometimes. And I'll demo that here in a second, but let's continue with the knife tool. So the knife tool, there's nothing real special about it now that you kind of understand what's going on here. The only other thing is that I'll press K and C, and you can use K, C, and A now, or A twice if you're starting on an edge. So you can do KCA, it's at 5 degrees. You got the measurements. That cuts all the way through the mesh when you press C, okay? So it's cut through basically. Sometimes a knife tool will miss cuts. This is actually because of the way the Blender viewport works. The end distance here, from my understanding, is you got to reduce it if it has a lot of cuts being missed. You at different scales, it starts to act weird sometimes. So you might turn that in clipping distance down on the end panel there, which is quite useful. And on certain things, perhaps if it's too large or too small, it might start acting weird. You might have to turn that up or down, or even maybe adjust the minimum clipping as well, which is the opposite, right? The clip start. So you can think of this as like max and min for clipping, all right? All right, so with all that out of the way, we are well on our way to starting to master the software as far as like shortcuts go. There's only so many different tools in here that you're going to end up using on a regular basis. So like Control R, for example, is going to be a loop cut, right? And loop cut is loop cut and slide. That's why it starts moving afterwards. If you right click, it just goes to the center, okay? So Control R, mouse wheel up, you get multiple loop cuts. You can slide them or right click. You'll get something like that going on, all right? Alt Z is X-ray, which I didn't really get into, but X-ray is up here, pretty common, and Alt Z is just a shortcut for that. If you want to switch between render views like solid and wireframe, for example, you can do that right here as well. And then Alt Z on and off as needed. So a lot of your objects in Blender are double-sided rendered by default. So if we select this face here, we press X, we can actually delete this face real quick. We can see there's kind of like an interior in here. Now, this is actually kind of problematic because it's not exactly the way the geometry really behaves, especially if you're going to like video games and stuff like that. Here's the thing. Face orientation is what a lot of guys prefer using. That's fine. I've been modeling for such a long time and worked in other software before Blender and before this was really a thing even. I always use backface culling. So if this is your preference, you can use this. This is up to you now. I prefer using backface culling. I think it's a better option, but it's a little bit harder to use perhaps if you're not used to working this. So, but it does work and it's quite effective and efficient. So I can hold shift, select these, press X, delete. I can grab a an edge here. If we have parallel edges, or basically we have matching verts, we can grab an edge and press F and it starts to fill in an area like this. Okay. So F is really quite useful, but it doesn't have to be just like this either. Like it can be an ingon. So if this was like a big section here that was missing, we can select edges, alt click. Usually you can select open ends like this by alt clicking them. Not always, but sometimes you got to control click around them. And then you can do F and just fill it. Okay. So you don't always have to create quads necessarily. You can do things like this, right? If I grab a vertex and hit Control B and V or Control Shift B, does the same thing. You can do a beveled vertex. Okay. Let's say we take an edge here, grab this edge. This was kind of actually new to me because I didn't even realize Blender did it this way. But if we select a series of edges and we hit P, we can separate edges and it will automatically start a new object. Okay. So when we go down here, you can go back to object mode. We can try to select that now. You might have to get it off the outliner, but we do in fact have some edges like so, right? And as long as you're creating edges like this, you can extrude them and you can create faces off of them. You'll see here, it is possible that sometimes your normals end up backwards. So you need to grab these things. And a lot of times you're going to press Alt N and you'll recalculate outside or inside, or you'll just set from, or excuse me, you'll flip each individual face that you want, perhaps. Also shortcuts here on everything you're doing just about. So Alt N menu, you'll see there's like Shift N and there's Shift Control N to recalculate those both ways. You can right click. You'll see we have like E, I for inset, and all these shortcuts are extremely useful, generally speaking, to understand that they exist and that you can work with them. Because like split can be quite useful as well. So if you ever wanted to just like say separate, let's say we do a knife cut real quick. We do KCA. And we do a knife cut, and now we do this face here. If I can get a hold of it, we'll shift select it. And we select these faces. If we just right click or press Y, we can split. When we split it, if we press G after and we start moving, you see like it just separates it. That's all it does. But it's not a new object. We're not pressing P separate selection. We're just splitting it, right? So now we can get in here. We can grab edges. We can press F, FF, and we can do that number. We can Alt Shift select both sides, Control E, because they match with the vertices, the amount of vertices. We can do a bridge edge loops. So Control E, bridge edge loops, and we'll have something like that if we wanted it, right? All right, so here's the thing. I kind of skipped something. Remember that this was context sensitive when we were in a vertex, right? An edge and face. The right click menu is context sensitive, but we have other menu options up here as well that you need to look into a lot of these different tools, all right? They're all very, very useful, but Control F is going to be face. Control E is going to be edges, and Control V will be vertices, okay? Mesh used to have an option, but it doesn't, I don't believe anymore, unless there's some shortcut I don't know about. But the mesh options in here are quite useful sometimes because you got things like transform and all kinds of other fun stuff in here, right? So there's like mirroring options, and the mirror options are over here as well. I wouldn't recommend using them in edit mode, generally speaking, but it's possible that you'll use them at some point, either when you're doing like rigging animation or possibly sculpting and whatnot. And otherwise, I would probably recommend just using Symmetrize, which is right here as well. So we'll go over that. Now that we're at it, we might as well just go over it, right? So if I do a mesh like this, and I grab these over here, and I bevel this for real quick example. My origin point here is in the center. So if I do press A, select everything, mesh symmetrize, I want to do, in this case, negative Y to positive Y. This little gizmo tells you what direction you're oriented in. So the solid fill obviously being positive, and then the other one you float over, it says negative, right? So we're doing negative Y to positive Y. So when we symmetrize, we need to change it to positive Y to negative Y, or excuse me, negative Y to positive Y. And we'll get a symmetry going like that real quick. Now, we don't necessarily have to work in this manner necessarily. We can always use modifiers, guys. And so things that I'm doing regularly are like mirroring, right? So the mirror modifier is the same process. It's positive Y to negative Y. You have to bisect this one and you have to flip it. And it's going to do the same thing, but it's not changing the mesh, right? So anything that we do from here on out and anything that we modify is going to be on us. And it's not like permanent, right? Like we can go back in and tweak things if we wanted to, and it's always going to update. We don't have to go symmetrize it every time necessarily. Now there are some benefits to symmetrizing things, and that is that you'll end up being able to create loops a little bit easier or kill loops off while doing your modeling. But still very effective to work with the mirror modifiers while modeling. So something you might want to do, and definitely something you want to put to use. So do get used to using your modifiers. There's a ton of different modifiers that you can potentially put to work. Some easier than others, such as like Lattice, for example. The Lattice modifier is rather challenging to set up because of the way they have it going, but I think they updated that on this version. Actually. We'll see what happens here in just a second. I haven't checked it out. But usually you have an object selected, maybe press Shift A and you create a lattice, and lattice deform selected maybe. Okay. Right. So I might have added another lattice modifier. Okay, yeah, they did update it. So that's good. So let me go through this again. Shift A, lattice deform selected. You have to have it selected. What it does is it adds the modifier and it sets the lattice object. This is the lattice object here. This has a menu. You can bump them up and down. And then now we can go into edit mode with it. And we can grab these vertices and we can start to deform things. So we can scale these, for example. Or maybe we want to grab these back ones over here. You can see once I accidentally grab this plane in edit mode, sometimes this happens where you hold control and you try to select something, or you hold shift. Maybe you accidentally select something in the background. It makes it a selected object. And now, so like control clicking no longer works because of this. This is probably one of the worst features in Blender, in my opinion. Although I do believe it has some functionality when you're doing rigging and animation. It's and other certain things like using knife projects. It's not really that useful in most cases. So, just be careful when selecting things. And if you see that happens, that's a problem, right? Like I think that's something that Blender shouldn't do by default. But you can see we can now, pull these down. We can jump into our side views, hit Alt-Z. You have to hit Alt-Z to select through things. Otherwise, a lot of times you'll select only the front side that you're looking at, right? So a lot of times Alt-Z it. In the case of the lattice, it doesn't matter, but for mesh, it does. So you can see here, we can pull things around, we can deform them. If we got mostly quad mesh, it works out generally better than if you have big n-gons everywhere. But a lot of your modifiers are going to require some kind of sub-object to work. So in the case of like a mirror modifier, let's apply this lattice by hitting Control A, and we'll delete this lattice now by pressing X. But in the case of the mirror, let's say we want to mirror across a different object. So it mirrors across the origin point by default. If I was to create an empty, so I press Shift A, create empty, press G, Shift Z. Okay, so moving constrain G, Shift Z lets you only move in two directions. So you can do G, Shift X, Shift Y, Shift Z, whatever the case, right? But if I move this out like this, we can take this and we can mirror across this empty by eyedropping it. All right. This is kind of fun, especially when you're exploring shapes and forms, because now you can also mirror and rotate the empty and move it around and get all kinds of different results out of this, right? So a very efficient, effective way of using that potentially. Now, a lot of times what you're going to find that you end up actually using this for is when you want to create 90-degree corners on like modular pieces, you'll find that you'll end up doing this quite a bit. You actually rotate it 45 degrees though. And so you'll end up with something like this perhaps, but like modular walls and stuff like that, you can actually bisect them up. And that way it'll create kind of like a corner unit if you wanted it, right? So it can be quite useful to you. We're not going to use it, but between the mirror modifier and using empties, it's quite useful. And any of the other modifiers can use empties as well, right? Okay, so right now it's pretty hard to see things sometimes. Um, what I like to do, generally speaking, is I use a matte cap, and I also use object instead of material. But this is optional, so we're going to leave it on material. And we'll go to, like, you have all different kinds of matte caps that you could potentially utilize. You can see there's like just a number of them in here, and I guess they made some updates to the matte caps too. That's pretty interesting. Um, some pretty neat looking matte caps in here now. But the main idea is that you have these options to get in here and start looking at things with all kinds of different matte caps. That's cool. I would recommend just using a bright one, generally speaking. You'll see why here in a second. Um, and we can set cavity perhaps on, set it to both. I actually prefer turning ridge off unless I'm sculpting. It's one of those weird things. But ridge off, because usually it gets misleading and it makes you feel like you have more edge detail than you actually do. And so it's not really super good if you're trying to design things necessarily. We'll apply the mirror for now by hitting Control A. Oh, by the way, modifiers. If you have lots of modifiers, let me just kind of add a bunch in here real quick. This can happen sometimes where you end up with a bunch of stuff. You can click and drag down to close them all. So that way you can just reorder them a little bit easier. And when you want to open it back up, just open it back up, right? Um, I believe A will open and close them as well. All right. So that's something to keep in mind there. Now, I don't think, you can't do multiples at the same time. That'd be kind of cool if you could shift click them and move them all as a group. But unfortunately, that's not really a thing. So, but you can open them and close them real quick like that. It's very efficient and also should work on the outliner too, maybe. I'm not real sure about that one actually now that I think about it. But at least it works over here. It does, that option works on some things in other menus and whatnot. So just keep that in mind. We don't need all that right now. Um, a material. Let's assign one material real quick. And usually by default, you go to material preview, right? And it's going to give you just a basic material, nothing special. And sometimes material preview takes a little while to load up for some, a little odd. And sometimes, um, anyways, so, but yeah, material preview, usually you can set things like metallic or turn the roughness up or down and set up your materials. That's not really what I wanted to show you with this. What I wanted to show you is that we're going to minimize that. When we have material use up here, right? This material, if you have a material assigned to your object, material option and a material assigned to your object, there's a little option called Viewport Display. This will actually let you change the colors down here. And you can change like the roughness perhaps, but we're using a matte cap right now. We're not going to see any changes here with these guys. So it's only color in this case, and we can change the alpha up or down as well. So it can become transparent more or less. And that's great. So anytime we have multiple objects and we just want to have different materials on them with different colors, we can duplicate a material, hitting that icon, and then we can just change the colors if we wanted like that, perhaps. Could be useful. You can color code things based by material when you're working on a project. Actually, materials work generally pretty well for this, and it's not really a big deal. But I just wanted to point out that that does occur. And if we were not using matte caps, we were using that studio lighting, like non-lit maybe. What we can do here is we can change the metallic values and the roughness values now. So that's something that you can consider if you use that studio lighting, right? Now, like I was saying earlier, is that I'm going to get rid of the material on this one. We'll delete this one. I use usually object color, right? And I even made a little add-on that lets it show up in this end panel here under item. But where it's usually located anyways is down here, viewport display, color. And so you can change colors here as well. And if you're using object, you can see it's going to update like this. So this is going to be based on every object that you create. So if you have multiple objects, right, you can just change the color. You don't assign materials to these really. And it doesn't work per face either. So you can see how that works out though. And Sometimes this is good for color coding as well. Unfortunately, if you wanted to like use like blue on this guy over here, we don't have like a little template or a palette or anything. We control C here, go here, control V. That's all you can do with that one, unfortunately. I might update my add-on where I try to make a little color palette, and we'll see what happens with that anyways. I gotta figure out how to do it. All right, with that out of the way, the working in Blender should start to feel relatively fast. Like it shouldn't feel like a big task or chore to get anything done in this software, right? Well, excuse me. It's still going to be challenging to do things in the software, but it should start. You should start picking up speed at it, and you should start to feel a lot more comfortable at least, so that you're not always feeling like you're struggling just to do things like get around in the viewport or maybe work close to an object or maybe even have to work inside of an object. You should start to feel a lot more comfortable navigating anyways. I just realized I didn't explain that 3D cursor thing, but the 3D cursor, if I hit shift and right click around, it's just going to kind of go wherever it goes. But because if I go into edit mode and chamfer this corner here, because we set that option for it, we can do a shift right click and you'll see it lines up to the surface here. So if I create something like a cylinder, I press shift A, create cylinder. We have an option when creating things that we can do like 3D cursor. Okay. So this can be quite good sometimes, because now we can kind of, put a cylinder in here and adjust it and get exactly what we want going on. Like so perhaps, right? And if we want to change our colors now, we can also, we can backspace to reset this, by the way. And maybe just use the gray value. It's the HSL selector. A lot of times my color picker is going to look different than yours, by the way. The circle one's okay. There's nothing terribly wrong with it. I just prefer using the square SV plus H one. But this one does actually have a bug with it, which is if you're in the gray values and you try to set the hue, a lot of times it freaks out and it doesn't work right. I don't know if they fixed it or not. But you used to have a problem with setting the hue. And so you would have to pick, if it wasn't grayscale, you'd have to pick saturation and then change the hue. So maybe older versions of Blender, it seems like it's working fine in this version, which is a nice update. But there was something to look out for perhaps in the past. And so that's just something to keep in mind anyways. Yeah, so a lot of times you're working on objects and, when you're doing this, you want to like mirror this. Yeah, a mirror modifier. And then you can sample the other object and then mirror across that one perhaps, right? So this is always a useful strategy here. Transforms, guys. Let's go over transforms. You have global and local and normal. And so these are going to be the main ones you use. It's not too often you're going to use any of these other ones other than view maybe. But you can use view and you probably already used it and you didn't realize it. When you hit G and move, that's using a view transform. So it's actually moving like left to right on the screen. Okay. So it's an up and down. And yes, it does change position in the 3D view, but that's more or less what it's doing. It's going based off of your view. How you look at the object is how it's going to move in 3D space, basically. All right. So that's a fun way of working sometimes. However, a lot of you guys are going to end up using like regular move tools, which is regular transform here. And this transform might be a little hard to see. It's set to global right now. So that's like the XYZ of the world. But you also have local transformations because the way we created this, we aligned it off the 3D cursor. It's already got a local transformation. If we were in edit mode, for example, we select faces. These all have, of course, normals. So if we use normal, you can see they're going to point away from the surface, basically, of that face. All right. So it's quite useful to know. But that can also happen on vertices as well. Vertices have their own normals. So if you want to actually visualize that, you go up to this drop down in edit mode. You got vertex normals and face normals right here. Okay. And if you want, you can also look at split normals, and this controls mostly the shading. Right. So split normals is going to be shading basically. But nonetheless, that's basically what transforms are. It's just going to change the orientation there. You can use custom transforms. So if I do a knife cut here and I select this edge and I press 2 and I select that edge, what we're going to find. Oh, and the reason I was saying to use let me go over this real quick. The reason I was saying to use a white matte cap is so you can change object colors, right? Because working with white models is actually kind of bad in a lot. So working with like grays or dark gray or darker grays, mid grays, things like that tend to work best. But if you you don't have a bright matte cap, if you ever use a color like red or something, it's always going to be darker. If it was like a gray matte cap. But otherwise, working on white models is actually pretty rough. So you might not do that as well. But the main thing, though, we'll darken it so you guys can see it a little better. The main thing here, though, is that like this edge is selected. We can come up here. We can create custom transforms. So I click that. Boom, we got an edge. And that's great because now everything we do will line up to that edge, right? Like we cannot not do anything other than that. So if I was to select say some faces in here, right? See how it lines up on X? If I press X, S, X, and 0, we can flatten and keep it flattened to that edge, perhaps. We can do this even in trickier ways. For example, if we do Shift double tap here, we got an active edge, and then we can use an active element with that edge transform. Now we can flatten all of this down to that edge. So it'll be like S, X, and 0. You'll see we can do things like that. Okay. So that's a fun little trick there. If you want to put it to use, you can do like a chamfer over here, perhaps. Maybe you want to flatten this out as well, right? So we grab maybe the face or switch to edges, and then we'll grab here, right? And so now we can do SX and 0 again, and we can pull that out perfectly flat there as well. They're all lined up now, which is great. Alt clicking here, Control B, doing a chamfer, right? You could press X if you wanted to, delete it, or you can press I to inset. And so we can inset. If we inset again and hold Control, so press I and hold Control, we can push things in. Fortunately, this one, it looks like we got, okay, no, it didn't cause as big of a problem as I thought it was going to. But a lot of times these things can become problems like this. So insetting sometimes has limitations. This is why you see a lot of guys end up cutting edges like this, because you can just select an edge now. We should have parallel edges. Maybe we don't. It didn't cut through the model. Okay. That's interesting. We can still work with this, but if they were parallel edges, we could have just grabbed the one and pressed F and went all the way through and filled it. Would have been better. So we'd probably want to go back and cut that back out maybe. But in our case, let's /. We can isolate. Now we can press X and we can delete faces. Okay. And this is where things also get interesting because we have something called vertex snapping, right? Let's go back to medium point. And for our snap, we're going to use closest. We're going to use global again for just now. We can grab here. You can press E and hold Control. All right, Alt Z if you need to. E, hold Control. E, hold Control. You see? So we can do things like this as well. Press E, E, hold Control. It's whatever vertex is closest to your mouse is the one it's going to end up using. But we can't do that. So we're going to have what's called doubles, of course. And you can see here, doubles, right? They're not even attached to each other, but they're so close because we vertex snapped them. So press A, M, merge by distance. It should be all the way down, the lowest it can go by default. And it should merge whatever's basically one on top of the other. In the case that they weren't perfectly lined up with each other, let's say I had, grab here and here. I'm just going to subdivide this edge real quick and create a vertex. But let's say these were like real close together. If for some reason we had double verts. Grab one, shift select the other, control or hit M, not control M, just hit M. You can merge at center, at last, or whatever the case here, right? In our case, let's do, you can see we select this one first, select this one last, boom, that's at last, okay? If we wanted to go to at first, it would go the opposite direction. If we do at center, it'll meet up in the middle, okay? So merging verts, very quick, easy to do. One of the reasons I think a lot of guys struggle with, like when I'm doing my videos, is that a lot of times I'm doing things like this, but I'm using shortcuts or hotkeys that are already like set up by default with certain add-ons. Like Machine Tools, for example, has a lot of different pie menus. They have like the edge, vertex, and face selection right off the bat, in object mode even, so that you can just go straight to editing your model. Whereas like the default Blender pie menu here, or the control tab or whatever, tab for pie menu option, you know, you got to go to object mode into edit mode, and then you got to use 1, 2, and 3. And every one of those behaves slightly different, like 1, 2, and 3, right? And so when you're making selections, like if we select with an edge, let's see if we can do this. I alt click an edge here, it does that. I use face selection and I alt click an edge, it does a ring selection. See what I'm saying? So a lot of those little things start to add up, and you have to just play with it for a little while and see if you can start to understand like what it's doing and when and where. And eventually, before you know it, you got it. It's not even a big deal anymore. You can follow along with pretty much anything I'm doing. Like inset, for example, just pressing I in insetting, we have options like edge railing. We have can do offset even, or we can turn it off. It's up to us. But insetting and holding control is super powerful. Okay. It allows you to just do things. Working with ngons, still very, very powerful. You can do that, and you should do that actually. Certain shapes are easier to knock out as ngons first, and you can work them into subdivision later if you're trying to do any kind of subdivision workflows. And so you can see when we do this inset here, like these are try to collapse into this corner here. A lot of times that's a dead giveaway. They need to collapse, right? And in this case, it gives us these 2 triangles, and it's better to use quads if possible, but not always. Like sometimes it's actually better to use a triangle ngon, but it's one of those things that you're going to slowly start to get used to. And this just basically knowing these shortcuts, I can now use a knife tool. I can do what I got to do basically. And knowing the shortcuts just goes a long way. So now I can start to turn this into a quad subdivision mesh. And it really won't be that big of an issue anymore. To get around in the viewport, select things, all the fun stuff, right? When it comes to sculpting, which I'm going to do another video on sculpting, but one of the things I do want to point out with it is that under navigation, trackball, right? This lets you spin the viewport like you're in ZBrush. It's not so great when you're doing just standard modeling, but it's really great when you're sculpting or you're doing any kind of like drawing with a graphics tablet. So you can see I spun my view and now it's all disoriented. This can happen to you sometimes. Tilde key, view right, boom. It's going to more than likely fix the viewport being rotated like that. So this is something to keep in mind. All right. All right, I'm going to show you one more, a couple more things maybe, but then we're going to end the video because we're getting close to an hour now. So we had selected this earlier and we hit / to isolate it. And you see how the view moves like this? So if we were working on something really close in and we're like, oh, we got to do something here, but we got to isolate it for some reason, right? It does that number. And it is very, very annoying. I wish they would just completely disable that feature on vanilla Blender, because it's another thing you can change, but if you're new to Blender, you don't know these things, and that something as small as that can start driving you nuts. So knife, oops, sorry. We're just going to type in the keybind for it actually. And it's actually called local view or something like that, right? So / keybind. You don't know the name of the feature, and you'll see / here in the 3D view. Okay. That's frame selected. You can turn that off. You don't need it. And it should now let you, when you're over here, for whatever reason, maybe we got to work on the back side of this and this thing's in the way, we / it no longer does that zoom in and zoom out stuff. So you're going to be much better off with that. And you're going to feel, you know, way more comfortable dealing with that anyways. And now, so here's the big secret, I think that, well, maybe not a secret. I've talked about it on the channel before, but we do a loop cut, we do a bevel, and if we inset this and hold control, that's great, right? I get tired of going over and hitting I all the time, do an inset, all right? The select box up here, usually it's set on, it might be set on the tweak tool or select box. In object mode, it's going to be like one or the other in edit mode and object mode. So object mode tools and edit mode tools will differ depending on what you have selected. So like if I go back to object mode, select box, edit mode, now it's the move tool. So you can set those and then it stays like faithful to that mode that you're in anyways. Now, the whole point of this is that I know this is a select box, which is great. I don't really use anything other than the select box. I don't use the tweak tool because the tweak tool, as good as it is, just using a move tool is the same thing basically almost. So I don't find it that useful, but the main thing is that when you hit W, it toggles those, right? And it'll switch to this one called circle, which behave, or you would think it would behave similar to like the circle selector with C, but it doesn't. Something slightly different, maybe. So I don't use it, right? I don't use the circle. It's not needed. I don't use tweak. And so select lasso is control right click and drag, right? So if you ever see me doing that one, just control right click and you can drag. I don't use it very often, but it's there if I need it, right? So W is kind of a useless shortcut for me. I don't find it all that interesting or useful anyways. So if you're in edit mode and you hit W, it does the same thing. All right. So what I like to do here, and you could try doing it outright first, which is in edit mode. Maybe when you hit I, like you see, we do an inset. All right, great. But let's change face. This is where you're going to find it anyways. There's inset faces. We can right click this and we can change this to a shortcut. Okay. So I'm going to hit W and I'm going to use W. Now in edit mode, it should start insetting by hitting W instead of using this. Okay. Back in object mode though, if you hit W, it still changes that. And that's a nuance to me. So what I wanted to do there is go to key map. I know which key it is. It's W. It's going to be in the 3D view. And you can see it right there. I'm just going to disable it. Just turn it off. You don't have to replace it or nothing. Just turn it off. Blender is actually pretty good with the hotkeys when you want to start customizing them. It's not too bad. But sometimes you got to disable things or you'll have conflicts. So like if in edit mode, if I press I to inset or I hit W to inset, but it's still mapped to W or box select, it's going to determine which one it wants to use sometimes. It might do either or, so you might have to disable one. This is how you do to disable them, guys. You look for it, disable it. You don't have to do anything special there. So now W does nothing here in object mode, right? So you could use that as a free key for all kinds of other fun stuff because you don't really need to use the other things. And now you're kind of a power user of Blender because once you've set that W key up, like we can do all of our other edits here very easily, right? Like whenever we need to extrude, we can just press W and hold control, right? If we need to do an inset, we can hit W and do an inset. Inset, hold control, we can extrude, right? But it gets better because we're doing offset even and possibly edge rails. There's usually a way that guys teach how to do extrusions that involve, let's just do a knife cut real quick. We'll do KA twice. Try to do 90 degrees here if I can get it to work. All right, and there you go. So normally you would select faces like this, hit Alt-E, and you have an extrusion menu. And one of those would be extrude faces along normals, right? And so this is the way it was taught for a very long time. And the way I used to do it for a very long time is Alt-E in it. And then you could just do offset even, right? Now, it's kind of funny that I ended up using that as much as I did in Blender because I came from Max, where Max, more or less, you can do insets the way I've been showing you here, where you just press I and then inset and hold control, right? So anyways, that's just the idea. Like now that you got that over there, you have extrude right next to W. You can use that. You can inset, super good shortcut. And then Alt-E right there. So you're never going to feel like you're just reaching across, well, you're going to not feel like you're reaching across the keyboard as much as you used to perhaps. Now, the only thing is occasionally, because you do still want to try insetting individually. So if you select a set of faces real quick, use the cursor selector perhaps. I press W to inset, right? We're going to get some kind of result like this perhaps. But I want to inset individual faces. I still have to reach over and press I. But now we're going to do individual face. Okay. So that's really not a bad deal that you have to go reach for I, because you don't always use that all the time. That's just something to keep in mind, right? It's just one of those things that occasionally you'll need it. Sometimes you don't need it. If we have an open edge, meaning like these faces here, this edge is open. And when we use inset with this, so I press W to inset, now I hit I. And if I hit B, it doesn't do the border there, okay? So that's a good one as well, because sometimes you don't want to have excess. Like if we just extruded this in, we get a double face back here, we got to delete. But now we don't have to because we inset and hold control. Boom. It's just going to make us a little bit faster and more efficient. And so ultimately, I mean, Blender, it's not that hard to use, but when you don't take the time to watch a video like this and start playing around with these different kinds of tools and looking them up too, watch videos on them, watch tutorials on them if you can. There's way more stuff you can do with like the knife tool. There's some like very good videos out there on it. There are, there's all kinds of just stuff in here to work with, guys. Like there's like the spin tool, and there's any number of these tools in here. Usually it just comes down to like, if it's just an edit mode thing where you're just getting in here and you're doing an operation, you have the menu here to tweak it, but while you're doing it, you have all those shortcuts at the bottom as well. So you can see holding control is one of those options. Depth. So that's one of those things. The more you do this, the better you get at it, the more awesome of a time you're going to have in Blender. It's still going to be challenging to model things. There's no way to cheat around that, but it is going to be is something that you want to go through anyways. Is you want to start learning all those little intricate little menus and things. A couple more things real quick. First, this is there's tons of more selection stuff up here, perhaps. Like we can do select loops, boundary loops, rings, check or deselect, more or less. Select mirrors even, which is nice sometimes. There's all kinds of fun stuff up here. We have a selection like this and we control X, it will dissolve the edges here. Keep that in mind. X, sometimes you do only want to dissolve a vertex, an edge, or a face. You also have collapse edges, which is kind of cool. So if, for example, I want to do collapsing, see if I can find a good one to do. Okay. It might not make much sense on this example, but like I select these two and I press X, we can collapse edges. See, like it just flattens them. So we could do that all the way down this way, maybe. Pretty simple. What else do we got here? Oh, if we have multiple objects, whether we're in edit mode or sculpt mode for that matter, if we're working on one and we want to work on another, you don't leave object mode now. You just hit Alt Q and you can go to different meshes and start working on them. So you do that, view selected, boom. You got to select it though to do view selected in edit mode. There you go. If you're selecting multiple objects that are in edit mode, well, excuse me, like we have multiple objects selected and we go into edit mode, we can work on them all at the same time if we want to. Well, that's a possibility. You can't do things like connect them together with like bridge edge loops, but you can work on them at least. And so, yeah, that's pretty much that then. And you can press L if you want to select certain parts of a mesh, if you have subparts and things like that. So just keep that in mind. Kind of interesting stuff you can do, right? So this wireframe, I assigned to a shortcut. I use the back button on my mouse on the left side of it. And so back button just lets me turn wireframes on and off real fast. Works out pretty well. And it's not too bad anyway. If the wireframes are, I don't know why they're so light. Maybe they changed the theme a little bit to be lighter. Or it's just a object mode thing. I don't know what's going on there. I'll have to look into that one. But here's the thing. We can see our wireframes now. These are useful and actually very important to be able to see. And while it's obvious they changed something in the theme, or maybe I got somehow messed up the settings or something. When they're really light like this, even in object mode, this is actually a terrible idea. It can be okay. Sometimes they're not as distracting, but a lot of times you can't see them when you're doing other things like an X-ray. That's when it becomes a nuisance because you can't see nothing now. So I'm wondering why they changed that theme option, because it's not as, it looks nicer, but it's not as efficient or effective. And it used to be an option that you could change, but it's not getting darker. Yeah, so Blender devs have been kind of dropping the ball on a few updates here and there. I think this is another one, but we'll see what happens anyways. And that's going to drive me nuts, to be honest. That's kind of why I'm pointing that out. All right, let's go to the mouse. We'll stop whining about that for a second. So I use a Logitech mouse. All right. Yeah, let me bring it up real quick. All right. So this Logitech mouse, most of you have probably seen this thing. It's G510. It is, or excuse me, G502, not 10. It is, it's customizable in a lot of different ways. Like you can set DPI and all that fun stuff, right? But mostly it's about setting up macros or commands as they put it, or maybe, or excuse me, macros. You can set up different things for it, obviously. Um, so when I'm saying I'm using the back button, it's forward and back, these two buttons. Okay. This one I don't even use, really. Not that useful a lot of times. Although I might have it set to something. I don't think I do right now. Other than that, I set these two on the side here, on the top side. Control number pad plus and control number pad minus. That's it. There's really nothing else special going on here as far as like mouse configuration. So to do that in this software, at least you have to create a new macro. And creating a new macro is kind of, it can be strange, right? So it's you can do it as a repeat or no repeat or a toggle or whatever you want here, really. And I repeat while holding, generally speaking. And you can record the macro now. So you can go ahead and do that and control number pad plus, and then let go of control. Okay. So it automatically does the up and down motion of the button press, basically. So you hold down control, tap number pad plus, let go of control. You'll get this. Boom. That is the macro. Okay. That's all you do to set up macros, basically. And you can save your macro changes if you want. Then now you got a strange one here. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete that one. We don't need it. But that's what I did for plus and or negative. Not rocket science, right? So that just allows me to now use my mouse very quickly. I know we got like sub objects in here. We could press A, P, separate by loose parts. And so that way they're two separate parts again, maybe. I don't know how those got stacked up like that. It had something to do with the mirror modifier, I think. Yeah. So it should be bisecting mirror modifier. So that doesn't do that. And you can flip it. Then you can just apply it. And then we'll have some actual geo here we could play with. But so if I select anything and I just control number pad plus now, it's very quick, right? No problems at all to do that. There's other selection stuff I have set up in another version of Blender, the 4.5. Oh, I'm going to be doing my videos in LTS versions from now on. We're just in 5 for this one. But the main thing is that like you can control number pad plus and minus, right? So if we were doing something like add-ons or get extensions, allow online access, we enabled something like Bool Tools. Let's install it real quick. Bool Tools, you might have to set up. No, not Booltron. What is that? I clicked the wrong thing there again. Bool Tools available. Okay, why is it like frozen up now? Did they keep it back? Did they add it back into the defaults? Maybe. Okay, I guess it's not going to show up now. Weird. Oh, it's down here. Oh, maybe I just didn't see it. My mind drew a blank. All right, Bool Tools, guys. This add-on, you got to go to the add-on section now. I hate this new extension setup. It's so weird. Bool Tools is like you get that extension and then you got to go to add-ons. They should have just made a new pop-out window or something for the extensions online with like icons that we can tell what the heck they're supposed to be doing or something. But the main thing is that there's options for this. So there's all kinds of ways you can set it up. I'm not going to go through setting all of it up, obviously, but um, you can choose like float, exact, or manifold booleans, and it should let you pick like how you're going to view them. But they might have changed some things here that I'm not real familiar with. Because usually you could just pick wireframe view. Oh, display color as wireframe. There you go. I once again skipped past it. All right. Anyways, I wanted to go through that real quick because if we create a cube and we're going to do Booleans, like a Boolean heavy workflow, usually you select an object, shift select the other object, and you can do a Boolean. Control Shift B for Bool Tools menu, or you can go to the over here and use that. This is actually really good, by the way, when you start doing the Booleans. But it's all Shift Control Number Pad plus, Control Number Pad plus and minus. Okay. So if we do, for example, we'll do this twice. So the first option here is auto booleans with shift control number pad plus or minus. And that is going to be the destructive ones. Okay. So I could take this one and this one, hold shift and do the down arrow, I guess, if you would, or button number, whatever on the mouse and number pad minus. It'll give us this. If I do this over here, but I don't do that, I just down, right? I don't hold shift and do it. We get the non-destructive version where this one's destructive. Simple enough. And so basically union and difference are the ones you're going to use the most. Those can be quite useful for this. Okay. Otherwise you just hit Control Shift B and then set an intersect or slice or intersect or slice. Really not that hard. So even in vanilla Blender, I know a lot of guys, they show add-ons, myself included, and they're like, you know, these add-ons are awesome. And there certainly is reasons why the add-ons are awesome, but you can be super, super fast in vanilla Blender once you start understanding all these things. That's the whole reason I wanted to kind of go over this video, is so that, A, people can follow along with what I'm doing and have a little bit of fun and not have such a bad time trying to, you know, figure out exactly what I'm doing, but they can just enjoy the process a little bit more and not worry about so much about shortcuts or hotkeys. And so when you're moving, by the way, if you know, I already went over it, GX, GY, GZ, hold Shift Z. We can do that number, right? So if you know these things now, you'll have a better time. That's all I'm trying to point out. And otherwise, you're reaching over and you got to take your hand off your mouse every time to do Control Number Pad plus or minus, right? Unless you have some kind of like little macro keyboard next to your keyboard. That's just what ends up happening, right? You'll actually be able to get very fast at this software and be able to use it very efficiently and effectively. I'm sure there's a ton of stuff I still missed in this video. I mean, Blender is thick with like just shortcuts and hotkeys. There's tons of stuff in here. The main thing that I'm going to point out real quick, let's just do a Boolean with these. Let's apply the Boolean. Now we have an object. You see this cutter here went for the ride and delete it now. We could probably delete this one too. All right. So they do parent apparently. That's cool. I want to do a mirror. Or let's say I want to symmetrize this. We go into edit mode. I'm going to pull it over to the right. So when you're in edit mode and you move, the origin point doesn't move, right? So that's something to keep in mind. So if I do select it all and mesh symmetrize now, I can do positive Y to negative Y. We'll get something like this going. All right. And so that's going to get us to this point with this object anyways. Press N, go to the item here. You'll see it's at zeros, it's at ones, and we might need to Control A and apply like rotation and scale perhaps. But we can symmetrize with that in that manner. All right, so the whole point of this was to just say that if like you're trying to do symmetrize a lot, you could set it to a hotkey, but you can also use what's called quick favorites. So assign to quick favorites. And now if we're working on this model and like we want to bring it over, we can press Q and symmetrize. A lot of times I'm using Mesh Machine, which if I fire up the other version of Blender real quick, and we look at this one here in Blender 4.5 with all my add-ons installed and whatnot, I'm usually using Mesh Machine, which is Alt-X in edit mode, and it symmetrizes. It's a little gizmo. That's the only difference, is we don't have to hand pick X, Y, or Z. Like, it's going to do it automatically, basically. And we can also press X again and cull and flip it over like that. So the add-ons add functionality to it to some degree, but a lot of times it's more or less the same features. So anytime you're watching a video where guys are using add-ons, more than likely you can do it in vanilla Blender, but it's going to be a little bit more challenging for yourself. For example, the Booleans, right? When we're doing Booleans, you know, Bool Tools is a huge help because it's much better than just doing it by adding the modifier. So a lot of times I see this quite a bit where guys want to learn vanilla Blender and not touch it without any add-ons, or like they don't want to learn it with add-ons at all. Well, that's useful, and that's how I started with Blender, at least. But I came from 3D Studio Max, so I already kind of knew what I was trying to do. The add-ons do help increase speed, and they can make things a lot easier in some ways. So, but there's a lot of shortcuts and hotkeys with them as well. And that's really where you run into your problems. Something as simple as like Shift S and doing a cursor to selected, right? Cursor to face. There's options here with machine tools to do Control and Alt click at the same time. So like not just hitting this, but holding Control or Alt will have different behavior. Almost all of the add-ons have this kind of functionality, or a lot of them do anyways. So like if I press Q for hard ops, and hard ops replaces your Q key to do its little menu here. It also has a Shift Q key as well. So we can do other things in here, like additional types of Booleans and whatnot, modifiers. The main thing is that when we're looking at these different features, you can see left mouse button plus shift, left mouse button plus control plus shift, and so on and so forth for all these different tools. They have basically presets for all those different actions. So that's where a lot of the add-ons can really confuse you as a beginner, because you're not sure exactly what it means when you know, it's saying that you can use control with it and it adds a new something that does some other thing. So the add-ons definitely will confuse you quite a bit. And a lot of times it's just checking on or off a box in a modifier or doing something similar. And that's really what's, I think, the most frustrating thing when you're watching those tutorials online and they're using a lot of add-ons. Now, I did notice something here that I kind of forgot to mention. We were going over the transforms but I didn't really cover them maybe quite as well as I could. But if we have an object, and when you first create it, usually the rotation will be at 0, unless you rotate it in object mode. I kind of mentioned in edit mode, you can move and the origin point stays in place. You can also rotate, it stays in place. So it stays at 0, right? But if you rotate in object mode, it doesn't stay at 0. Kind of does its thing here. Same with scaling, right? Now, this is your local transform. So if we use the move tool, for example, we have global and then local, right? And then of course, normal, we already kind of went over. But the main thing is that if we had taken this and rotated it in edit mode, the local rotation doesn't change, okay? So you got to be careful with that. You want to rotate in object mode if possible, so you get that local transfer, but not always. Sometimes you'll still do things in edit mode. The scale here, we press S and X and scale this out. And I go into edit mode and I try to bevel this edge. You see it bevels kind of weird. It might be kind of cool. You might want to use that. Who knows? But that's because of the scaling. It's non-uniform scaling, meaning these numbers aren't all the same. And it messes up your modeling tools. All right. And sometimes this can mess up things like remeshers or sculpting, whatever the case. So a lot of times you need to press Control A and apply scale. Right. And if you hit Alt S, it resets the scale. So go in here, Control A, apply scale. It's all ones now. The next time we bevel, it'll do that number. Okay, it'll behave the way you expect it to, anyways. All right, but we're not stopping there. I was going to quit this video a long time ago, but I kept missing things, basically, right? So we know in object or edit mode, when we move, the origin point doesn't move, right? You can actually move it though by hitting Control period. That turns on a little gizmo for it. So you probably didn't see it turn on because we have the move tool enabled. But Control period will let us move it now in object mode. And so we can just freely move it by hitting G. if we wanted to. But we can also use things like vertex snapping or grid snapping or whatever the case, or edge snapping. So in our case here, we're going to use vertex. We can hit G and hold control. We can snap it to vertices, right? Or faces or whatever the case, right? Could be quite useful to you. You can also align it or align rotation to target, right? So we press G and hold control now. It lines up to that normal of that vertex. If I can get in there and see it, but that normal's going out that way, right? So that's something that might be useful to you. Now, unfortunately, there is a way that you can kind of like do snap base and get the gizmo to be placed in the center of a face. I don't really find it all that good, to be honest, in Vanilla Blender, and I'm not going to really cover that here. But it is possible. It's just not. This is why add-ons make Blender more usable, in my opinion, because of things like that. It just gets a little bit too confusing, and like if we try pressing like G to move it and hold control, we're snapping to a face, but we need to hit like B. If I even get it to work. Yeah, so like there's like this weird thing where you can like hit B and it's nonsense. I know other software does similar stuff. I don't find it that useful of a way of working. And I don't really care for that at all. Generally, the origin point's lost out here in space and you have a symmetrical object. A lot of times you can just do set origin to geometry by right clicking. Also up here, set origin to 3D cursor or geometry. So in our case, we can select these faces, Shift S, do cursor to selected, right? Don't worry about the rotation of it. We can now do, we could do something like that and then right click in object mode, set origin to 3D cursor, boom. You can see now our setup there. A little bit easier, in my opinion, to do that. Also, we might want to place things in different areas. Like let's say this was going to be smaller and we want to go into edit mode and then do cursor to selected. We can grab this in object mode, Shift S, selection to cursor, excuse me, selection to cursor. Okay. So we can do things like that. You can snap the cursor as well. So the trick here is like grab vertex, Shift S, cursor to selected. Sometimes it won't line up the way it needs to line up on this, perhaps. Usually you would want Z pointing out, and right now it looks like Y is pointing out. You can see that little little green dot on the end of it. So there's a good odd chance if I took this and then selection to cursor, we can rotate it to line to the cursor, but it's rotated the wrong way. Blender nonsense that they just did that, by the way, and it doesn't work the way you would want it. So this is the trick with this, right? This is where, like, once again, machine tools comes into play, the different add-ons, guys. If I use cursor to selected here, it lines up. And we should see Z pointing out, which it doesn't display the colors here. That's a new addition. So, but if I do this cube and I say Shift S, selection to cursor, it's going to align to the rotation of it and get it on the normal. So Blender, the Blender devs, they do a lot of work. They do some really crazy stuff, especially like incorporating Vulkan and all kinds of other cool things they do. But some of these basics will actually hold you up and hold you back. And that's one of the things that a lot of people don't realize about Blender when they're getting into it, especially if they're new to just Blender. But if you're coming from like Max or Maya, you'll start to recognize Blender's deficiencies rather quickly. There's no grouping, and it's hard to align things sometimes. Among many other little issues, like you can't do a group of things and then use modifiers on a group. So you can use a collection or a collection instance, and then you can do like geonodes with collection instances, but it's different. It's a different workflow than what you're probably used to from other software. So it's one of those things. And there's so much more that you'll find when you're working on projects, like just the idea of like bringing in reference images. Someone asked about this the other day. Like, yes, we can press Shift A, create image reference, and we can go looking for a picture on our hard drive and then use that. However, if we have a picture, let me try to find one real quick. Let me do image. textures. Let's just use a textures.com picture, I guess. All right, so if we got this setup here, we got some textures and we want to drag them in as reference image, perhaps. We can. You just drag the image file over into the Blender view. Boom. It's going to do this number and it sets it up as a reference image, basically. So we get this kind of result here. And it's back, like we can see both sides of it. It aligns to the view as how you were looking at the view. So you want to jump into an ortho view maybe and bring it in. You can set your reference images up this way. Now, when we did this one, you can see it said put it in the background. A lot of times you don't want to do it that way, okay? You want it like this maybe, and you want to go to your setup here and change it to like front or back or whatever the case. And you may want to turn opacity on it. So reference images are, you know, when you're going to use blueprints and things like that. Not necessarily just textures like that, but you might use textures for modeling or sculpting as well. There's all kinds of other fun things you can do. It's just a lot of this adds up, right? Like, so when you're watching someone just doing a model and they're just going full speed at it, hopefully it doesn't make as much, like it's not as confusing now, right? There's lots of tools in here. There's lots of tricks. There's, it can be overwhelming for beginners for sure. And it's just one little thing after one little thing will toss you for a loop. And you know, you got to scale it maybe in object mode. If you want, you can apply the scale. You don't always have to do it right away. As long as they're uniform, it's going to behave a little bit better usually. But there might be times you actually have to. Duplicating, of course, Shift D, Alt D does a link duplicate, so they share mesh data. That means if I modify one, it modifies the other. And you can see how that works. Right? When you're using transforms, a lot of times you can leave it on global, and if you want to use a local transform, right? So we're using global, it looks like this. But when we hit G and say Z, X, or Y, it's going to line up to the 3D view, right? On global. But if we hit Z or X or Y twice, it'll line up to the local. You see? So that's a good one to remember as well. Because I might want to pull this edge out, for example. And it doesn't pull out in any direction that's useful to us. Okay? But if I hit X twice, now it does. Right? So little things like that, guys. There's all kinds of fun stuff. And when you toss the add-ons into it, it seems even more confusing. But it's really not. I mean, once you get used to it, it's really not that bad. And yeah, we're just scratching the surface to some degree. I mean, you're going to use these tools quite regularly. I use them in all my videos pretty much. It's just that there's other things out there, right? When it comes to like UV mapping, you know, if we're going to do some unwrapping and we have textures and UV maps already applied, there's like, you can preserve UVs over here in edit mode, turn it on and off as needed. And the UV editor itself is kind of bare bones here in Blender. There's not a whole lot going on with it. This is where, you know, you're going to want additional tools to make your life easier. Once again, another add-on, maybe like text tools or UV toolkit or something else. Be quite useful. And then eventually, like the packer's okay, but you can get something like Packmaster, which is a better packer for packing the islands. And it's just one little thing after one little thing. Like Blender as just a vanilla software, I would say this might be like hotly contested by some people, but I would say vanilla Blender has some pros and cons to it. But as far as like pure modeling goes, I would say Max and Maya are still better modelers in vanilla, right? So unfortunately, though, those are paid subscription service softwares, right? And so to get a little bit more of an edge inside of Blender, that's why so many guys use add-ons. That's the easiest way to put it. We don't have certain features here like edge constraint or normal constraint. We don't have, there's just a number of different things that, you know, we just don't have here. Like the ability to do a loop cut that preserves the curvature of a shape. We don't have that feature. Max has had that since like 2006 or something like that, 2007. So, you know, really, you know, Blender is limited in some ways. I know nobody wants to hear that. And it's something that can happen. Now, these should be all the same color. So if I click here and I change the color, it's going to change only one. Let's Control Z back a second. This is something that happens a lot in Blender. where if we alt click something and they all share a property, they should update together. In our case, this does not happen at all, but usually that's what happens. So we could try again, alt clicking, and it didn't work. So object color is not doing that right now. What else could we do? Let's try material real quick. The material should do it. Object color apparently did. So if, let's say we got one material on this one, we're going to use that same material, but we're going to duplicate them. So duplicate this one and duplicate this one. So they're all different materials now. Okay. They're all the same. And if I go to surface, alt click here and then change it to red. Oh, it's not doing it either. Okay. So normally, I'm pretty sure it used to do this in the other version of Blender there. I think it's screwed up now. Let's find out real quick. So actually, let's just assign a material. And this one I got set up differently with the HDRIs and everything. Duplicate. Maybe it never did it on the materials, and I'm just imagining this. It does it on modifiers for sure. But it should. Yeah, maybe it never did it on materials. All right, that's fine. Let's do the modifiers. And let's say we had a bevel on each one of these. You take this one, shift select this one last, so it's the active element, Control L, we can copy modifiers. Okay. So normally, like if we select all these and we start changing the offset, only one of them is going to change. But if we alt click it and drag it, you see they all change and they update at the same time. That's something to keep in mind. What if they had different values? Like this one's smaller, this one's or bigger, and this one's smaller. And we select this one last, so we're using its little setup here. So you can see it adjust. So we hold alt and do it now. So you can actually do them when they don't actually line up with each other too. It's just about like the differences between them, I think, or something like that. So anyways, hold alt, try that. Also, when you're inputting things, like we want all of this one to be at 1 maybe, right? Click and drag down, type 1, boom. That's a very, very useful one as well. You don't have to type in 1, 1, 1, 1 over and over and over again. But you can do that very fast too by hitting the tab key. So like you type 1, tab, 2, 1, boom. So there's different ways of working with the input fields as well. Obviously, like if we wanted to move this one +1, we can do that. We can use it like a calculator more or less. If your object is a certain size, let's say we wanted to have this at 6 foot, 6 FT. Okay. Let's make this 2 FT. Maybe make this, I don't know, 48 inches. See? So you can use imperial, you can use metric, you can do pretty much what you got to do here. You want to do it by, I don't know, 120 millimeter. There you go. See? Type in the number it needs at the end there. And you can do it, like I was saying, like a calculator, 120 millimeter plus 240 millimeter. Something like that. In our case, we could have just typed in plus, you know. But anyways, I think you get the idea. So Blender, all in all, this is a long video, right? Tips and tricks. There's a lot of things for it. There's a lot of things you can do in it. And I know I keep missing things because there's more to talk about. And like, for example, when you're in edit mode, you can hide mesh. But when you go back to object mode, it shows back up. So you need to get used to the idea of hitting Alt-H and unhiding things. In object mode, you can hide things as well. Press H and it hides it. Oh, that was edit mode. Object mode. H. It's on your outliner. It should be hidden. Okay. These objects, they have different view options here. One that you're going to want to use quite regularly is where you want to kind of freeze it. And so under visibility, you just make it unselectable. That freezes it more or less. Okay. Now, it's kind of hard to tell which object this is now to some degree. Like which one's frozen. So this drop down up here, you can turn on the arrow. All right. When that arrow's on, that's what's frozen and what's not frozen, or selectable and not selectable. All right. So can't select it. We turn it on. Now we can select it. Something as simple as that, right? Like it should be, I think things like this should be a little bit more on by default or something. It's kind of a confusing situation when you're trying to work on an object and it's frozen, or like if you hit the one key and it hides everything, for example. That was the older versions of Blender. Blender 5, they've updated this, so hitting one now does nothing as far as I'm aware. 1, 2, and 3. Usually if you had multiple collections with objects in different collections, so if I press M, move to new collection, whatever this ends up being, right? So if I hit 1, 2, and 3 in older versions, it would hide everything but the first collection or the second collection or the third collection. It doesn't do that in the 3D view no more, so you're not going to run into that problem. But the outliner, it does do this. So now if you're ever in the outliner and you accidentally hit 1, you might not know that you're doing that. But basically 1 will hide everything but the first, 2, 3, right? And if you do Shift 1, it'll hide and unhide. Shift 2, hide and unhide. Shift 3, hide and unhide the collections. So this is really good when you're trying to hide cutters, for example. Like maybe you don't want to work with those, you know? If you need all the other groups so you can shift them. And that just helps you keep things a little bit more organized. This list a lot of times is too small. I want to just point this out. You will find that at some point or another, I'm just going to join it up for now. Over here, it's not as useful potentially if you're working on complex scenes. So like anywhere we have this little arrow pop up, we can right click and we can do, in this case, like a vertical split. We can split this way. If you ever want to get rid of these, you can usually join left or right by right clicking on them, or up and down as well. In our case, if we join left, it'll go away. But we can vertical split, set it. We can drag this around now. And if we want, we can switch it to the outliner. So all these different editor options are in here, where you have like the dope sheet, the image editor, and all kinds of other fun stuff, right? UV editors, texture editor. Anyways, outliner is the one we're looking for. So you might want to get used to working with it like this sometimes, where you just kind of customize your UI a little bit. Like I don't need this much of the animation bar. I'm not using it. Maybe I want to do like some cloth sim or something later on. I still might need the play buttons, but I don't need to see all the timeline. I'm not keyframing things. So I might do something like that. Just lower it down, put this over here, perhaps. I mean, if you really want, you can do like another horizontal split perhaps, and do something over here in this area as well. Whatever you want, basically. So maybe the shader editor or something. I don't know, something goofy. If you ever found a need for that, you could do another 3D viewport. You can always customize these, obviously. So if I press N, get rid of that side panel because it was everywhere. Do like render preview over here, perhaps. So we can do, in our case, we're doing Eevee, right? Shift right click, create a light, area light, just light power. So this would be like a render preview. You can press T, get rid of that. You can actually turn most of this stuff off here, actually. Like you can disable these and right click the menus usually and get it working. So you can turn show headers off. A lot of this stuff you can get to go away, even these guys over here. Actually, I think we needed the header to get that. But anyways, the little arrows will let you bring them back. Right. And yeah, the gizmo, I guess, is just going to show up regardless. You can disable that entirely if you don't want it. I personally use it, but I don't like the big one anymore because it's not that useful to me. So the interface, we do, see if I can find it now. I always forget. For viewport, interactive viewport, do simple. It'll be smaller at least. You can change the size of it as well. These little icons here on the side, I don't usually use. So now if I can remember where the heck they are, that's a different story. Navigation controls. Okay. Turn those off. Yeah, so basically it's much more minimized now. And you see that works out pretty well anyways. Right. So you could do a setup for a render now at this point. needed to. Change your materials. And we're doing, what are we doing over here? Render preview. If we had material preview, would use the HDRI, but in render, you have to set up an HDRI, doing world, environment texture, open, go to your textures folder, go to textures, and then we'll do HDRIs. I got a bunch that I pulled in from Substance and Marmoset and stuff, but basically, pick your HDRI of choice, and you'll have it in the background now. No option to blur it as of right now, I think. Although they've updated some of the nodes in Blender, so we might be able to pull off a Gaussian blur at some point. Be kind of nice. Anyways, with that kind of set and done there, we can control spacebar to go full screen. So this is something I actually prefer doing as opposed to leaving it as like a split screen where I only get use of half of these. I'll make like little sections like this sometimes. Just keep them rather small. And so if I want to maybe like the UV editor here. So UV editor. I can just kind of reference that real quick, right? Like I can turn the menu off even if I wanted to. Press N, bring out the side panel. Not a big deal because like if I'm working on a model, I set some seams and I want to unwrap it real quick or use the UV editor, I can just get over here and do that with Control Spacebar or Control Alt Spacebar. It's up to me, right? And but yeah, that'll take the UV editor full screen. So if we're in edit mode and we need to start unwrapping, do that maybe. That's something I do quite commonly. Really up to you on how you're going to use it though. If you're doing like a lot of box unwrapping, super useful because now you can just like rotate things. If you want to customize it and set it up with like over image and using fixed sizes, powers of 2, so it lines up on a grid. You can turn like grid snapping on. So that way you can do atlases and things like that, right? Anyways, yeah, so basically that's it, guys, man. I mean, there is so much that goes into working with Blender. Like trying to explain it all in one sit-down session in one video like this, I don't really feel is super useful, as opposed to just getting your hands dirty and getting into Blender and trying to do things. But hopefully you pull some stuff from this that'll help you not run into so many issues when using vanilla Blender anyways. Use quick favorites, guys. Press Q when you have a quick favorite set. If you want to do transform align objects as a quick favorite. The quick favorites in edit mode will not be the same as quick favorites or in object mode and edit mode will be different, basically. Okay? You can see how that works out now. They're also context sensitive if you want to think of it that way, right? And yeah, I mean, so that's pretty much what we end up with. Rather interesting. And, you don't have to customize your user interfaces if you're kind of new. It doesn't really make as much sense to. Later on, you can do that as much as you need to. Just get used to kind of using what's there first. And then when it starts to annoy you and you realize it's kind of slow working with certain setups, maybe you can create your own. But as you're learning, just keep it simple. Don't try to customize too much stuff. Try to customize it after you get a little bit more competent with the regular tools, and that'll help you out quite a lot, basically. You see this HDRI is just a studio light setup. So if I want to rotate this, and pressing R won't cut it. R and Z does that. Y, X, R, Z twice. See? All that adds up. So you can see I'm hitting A twice rapidly, or G, X, Y, Z. All those fun little shortcuts, guys. That's all they are. There's nothing too fancy about it. Once you get comfortable with it, you'll be like, man, it's easier than I thought it was. It really is. It won't be a big deal anymore. I'm curious what happens if I try to bevel these. I don't suspect they're going to work out very well. Get it smooth. Do a weighted normal. I guess it works. Copy the modifiers over. It didn't work on as well on this one. This one had a subdivision on it. No, it doesn't. All right. Yeah, so not the greatest looking thing for a thumbnail, but maybe it'll be all right. Who knows? We'll get rid of those bells. Or at least turn them to chamfers. So anyways, that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed. Check in the next one, all right?